Hello, and welcome to Open Wounds Podcast. I'm your host, Candice. This podcast is about healing the wounds that you can't see and leading a revolution against oppressive systems that keep them open. We're going to talk about really practical tools for managing complex PTSD, as well as dive into relevant current day topics that make healing a daily practice. You can follow us at IG at Open Wounds Podcast or watch on YouTube at Open Wounds Podcast. Please rate, review, like, subscribe, all the things, and enjoy this week's episode. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Open Wounds Podcast. I have a guest with me today. Her name is Chrissy Kirchhoefer, and she is going to tell us about tax resistance or tax striking. She is with, and I'm going to try to get this right, the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee. And we will link that in the show notes for anybody who wants to go to their website. It's full of great information. But welcome to the podcast, Chrissy.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Candice.
Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with this organization and why you were passionate about not paying your taxes?
Yeah, great question. For me, it started some years ago. I was still in college when I found out about war tax resistance. I had gotten involved with some intentional communities, the Catholic worker community that is throughout the United States and world. But I was on a path of becoming a social worker. And while I was studying in school, I was realizing and finding out that a lot of the resources that would go to our communities were going towards militarism. So I kind of saw that ahead of getting into that profession and realizing wow, there's a lot of resources that would really benefit our community that are going to militarism and war. Also, at that time, the United States was involved in bombing Iraq. So it wasn't, it was kind of supposedly a period of calm and not war, but we were bombing. And so it was that double speak was really becoming clear to me. So I got more information. I found out about the traditions and rich history of war tax resistance and began practicing. It was kind of at that time, I was fresh out of college or still in college, so I wasn't making a lot of money, but it was definitely something that began to really impact choices I made in my life, what I wanted to invest my time and energy, my life resources into. And for me, it was really important. It happened within the context of community. So I was living with people that had been practicing war tax resistance and who had shared, their journey towards it, kind of the wider history of it in the United States. And I was also living with people who were impacted by war. A lot of Vietnam veterans. We had a shelter for men, and a lot of them were just kind of devastated from what they experienced in the Vietnam War. And this is many decades later. So seeing the impact on individuals who had to participate in that war, the draft was in place at that time, so they didn't really have the option of resisting. So those were really foundational time and experiences in my life that really paved the way for choices I made in my life. I also traveled to Iraq and saw firsthand where our tax monies were going, the impact of the smart bombs that weren't so smart and were lodged in little kids' pelvises, and those firsthand experiences of seeing where our money was spent and the impacts it had on people who, were just, civilians, innocent people who were impacted by what our money was funding. So that was really kind of the point, the entry point, and really has flavored a lot of the decisions making over the years. And kind of, in some sense, and maybe this is a cautionary tale to others, I was kind of doing it, again, within the context of community, but kind of on my own a little bit. And so getting involved with NWTRCC was really very life-giving. It was very much for me like a homecoming to a family that was out there, and I knew they were always there, but then getting to know them and people's stories and having that ripple effect into being able to take more risks in my life, learning about how people were interacting with life, how they were giving back to their communities, and ways that they were really investing and building into that community that they were
Mm.
longing for and actually, making tangible. So, yeah, later got involved with the National War Tax Resistance on their administrative committee, and then have been serving as outreach consultant with them since 2019. So,
Nice. Wow. You hit on so many things in there that I was like, "Oh my gosh." Um, the first of all being in social work, because that was what my degree was in. I got a bachelor's in psychology with a minor in sociology, and at the time, it really shed light on, and then going to work in social work, on the ground in nonprofits and for the government agencies, it really made it very glaring that we are not prioritizing these people. Like, the first thing to get cut whenever they do cuts is these programs that help veterans, that help, impoverished people, that help people with disabilities and the elderly. And so that was, something I totally resonate with, is when you're trying to do work that you feel is valuable and give back to your community, you're like, why is the military budget like 5 times the military budget of any other developed nation, right? And
yeah.
why are my money that I'm paying to the government, I have no say over where it goes.
Right.
It's really infuriating. But I do think a lot of people feel this way, but they are afraid of the consequences, right? Like, that's where I got, especially in the last couple years, where I was like, I can't in good conscience give a dime to this government and what they're doing. I mean, yes, we have been bombing people, but like you said, it was very coded. It was very like, my husband always refers back to Obama. And I was like, yes, Obama was very polite and he was very nice and he said very great things at the podium, but behind the scenes, we were still killing people. We were still taking tax dollars that could have gone to our citizens and our residents, and we were murdering people overseas, right? And so, I think what I get caught up in is like, okay, I don't want to give the government my money, but I don't know how to not give it my money, right? So,
Right.
I know we had talked a little bit beforehand on like somebody who, like, let's say they're W-2, they work for a corporation, they get a paycheck. The money's taken out before they even get
Mhm.
it and being given to the government. And those people would generally get a tax refund. So if somebody falls in that category where they're like, I can't tax resist, they already got my money. Like, what is an approach somebody like that would have if they want to get involved with tax resistance or tax striking?
Yeah, that's a great question, Candice, and so glad you asked. And I guess maybe even to backtrack a little bit, that is the perception that the IRS in the United States has this huge fear factor, for all of
Mhm.
us that okay, this is what we have to do. And I think one of the things that's becoming more clear to me lately is like, this is actually, our taxes are actually our labor. That is our life
Mhm.
force. That is like, we are investing in our time and energy to make these wages, and the government is extracting, in the
Yeah.
United States, about half of it is going, our federal income taxes is going to the military. That's been
Wow.
going on for decades and decades and
Yeah.
decades. And so it's not just war and bombs, the preparations for war, the,
Mm.
nuclear weapons and such. And so we do have this belief that we're locked into, doing it in this way. And you mentioned the W-2, like a lot of people have just gotten their W-2s in the last month in January that have laid out exactly what they made in 2000 or 2025. And
Mhm.
so, when many people begin jobs as an employee, they get a W-4 form that they have to fill out with their employer. And we at Newtrick, we have a lot of resources, and we've been doing some workshops specifically on W-4 resistance. And so an employee has the opportunity anytime throughout the year that they can change their W-4 form. So
Mhm.
they can go in and, they can look at what they earned the previous year. And if it seems that they're going to be making that amount of money, they can go in onto and file a new W-4 form, with that so that they will have all of their taxes withheld. So
Mm,
there's different deductions that people can make. And we have a
right.
really great 10-minute video that goes through it. I've been
Good.
practicing war tax resistance for a long time. I had to go and watch the video just to, like, how do I do this? And so
Yeah, yeah.
there's also a downloadable flyer that we have that goes
Oh,
through the
nice.
process of how to change that, how to deduct it, because, you know, if you're still trying to decide, will I, resist taxes because of this increased militarism, because of the
Right.
ICE funding, because, numerous reasons,
Yes.
then you have time to make that decision. So by changing your W-4 form, you are preventing the government from getting a zero interest loan for a
Right.
year that they can do whatever they want with your tax money, which again
Yeah.
is your labor, which is your life
Yeah.
force. And then you can decide how much if you want to withhold paying that money on principal, and what amount, or maybe you pay it all at that time. And so I think it gives people a lot of leeway and leverage. And I want to say too that, in the United States, we know that about half of our federal income taxes goes towards militarism. We in the United States actually have unique leverage in which we can resist that going to the government, in the
Hmm.
sense that it many times it is taken out of our paycheck, but in other countries they don't have a choice. So we really do
Mm,
have a lot of leverage in how much we withhold and our ability to withhold. And again, we're also the one that invests the most in militarism the world over, many
yeah.
times. So
Yeah, I had that happen one year where I think I must have taken like the maximum amount of deductions or something. I don't remember which way it is. If you're supposed to have a lot of deductions or none to get the most money back and not pay in. But then at the end of the year, when I went to my tax preparer, they're like, oh, you owe $5,000 because you didn't pay in enough. So I think
mhm,
that's the scary thing is people are like, oh, the government's going to come after me. They're going to seize my assets. They're going to garnish my paycheck. So
yes.
how do we actually do this without, because I haven't, I owe, I know it's a weird thing. I think one of my hospital bills got sent
Mhm.
in for collections and now they're trying to take it out of my taxes that I owe, or they're trying to tell me I owe somehow this way. And so they're threatening to seize property is what the last letter I got from them. So can you talk a little bit about like when you do start taking these actions, what you're going to be told by the IRS, you owe us this money. And if you don't do it, these are the consequences. So how can we still do this without facing these consequences?
Yes, great question there, Candice. And I also want to say that the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, NUTRIC, who work for, they've been at this for over 5 decades. And part of the
Nice.
organization has been to support individual resistors, communities of resistance, and really sharing information as, as changes happen in the IRS, as well
Nice.
as when people get letters, staying abreast of those changes, or taking note of how the IRS might be coming after people. And so
Yeah.
there's a wealth of information, and a lot of it is on our website. And so,
Okay.
I would encourage people, if they get those letters, or going to our website, and you can,
Mm.
or Googling with our website with that
Okay.
whatever topic, or calling the office with some of those questions. But a lot of times, when people, particularly when people file electronically, there will often be computer generated letters. So there's like a ton of
Okay.
computer generated letters that have different letters and numbers, and it's really intimidating, and it's really daunting because of that fear, of the IRS. And so I
Mhm.
want to just, maybe take a pause, or just acknowledge that um, people having those fears, and just that they don't have to address them alone, and that
Nice.
there's a lot of people out here who have been navigating these waters for a long time, and there's, a lot of information. And so um, I think also people's different circumstances in life change over time too. And so having a flexible approach to how one interacts with the IRS. And so,
Mm.
kind of that as a backlog. But I've also gotten lost. You asked a specific question that I wanted to make
Oh,
sure.
well, if somebody is getting letters, you can go to the website and you can put in like the letter code, or because I know sometimes at the top there's like a number code for the form that they've sent you, or you could call somebody at you guys' organization to ask for help. So I think what most people think is when they get to this point, they're like, oh, I don't want them to seize my property. I don't want them to put a lien against my house. I don't want them to garnish my wages, and they will give up. So how can somebody, like, have you guys been successful, I guess is my next question, in actually not paying? Like, how can we do that?
Yes. Yeah. And there are those real fears that people have in terms of, garnishment of wages, levies, and such. And so it's kind of interesting. So since the time that I've gotten involved in war tax resistance in 1998, at that
Mm,
time, the IRS has really dropped off going after people for
mm,
property, liens, garnishments. So it's kind of I feel like it's a little bit difficult to speak into in the sense that it has decreased
nice.
significantly, as well as what we're seeing with the IRS funding decreasing, as well as employees, reducing. And so that institutional knowledge that they've had, they've really been more reliant upon AI and,
Mm,
as well as just computer generated letters. And so
okay.
that's kind of been the reality in recent times, but it's very important that people have information when they go into this with as much knowledge and understanding of risks as they possibly can. So at Newtrick, we've been doing introductions to war tax resistance at least once a month in recent months,
Nice.
and have seen those numbers of people participating increasing. We've seen people accessing information and resources that we have. And as I mentioned, we're going to be doing an introduction to the W-4 resistance, as well as having office hours. So people
Oh,
coming
nice.
with specific questions. And, we have all of us have a variety of ways of learning. So I know there's a lot on our website. It's
Mm,
also like a lot to take in or a little bit
yeah.
overwhelming. There's YouTube channels. So I would again like encourage kind of like a buddy system or
Mm,
reaching out. We have a robust counselors list or
nice.
counselors list of people who have done training and who have committed or quite knowledgeable and up to date on information, or if they're not, they can direct it to the office. So would really encourage people to get information, but not to sit through it alone, and to really um do it with others or within the context of community, be it by going to one of the introductions to war tax resistance or the
Nice.
W-4 resistance.
That's really helpful because I know sometimes, uh, I will see a video and, like, especially if it's very technical, my eyes will glaze over and I'll be like, I'm lost." But knowing that I could call or email somebody, or that I could go to a Q&A, that is much more engaging for my learning style. And knowing that I have support, I think that's the other thing. I don't think I'm alone. Like, this has been something that's tumbled in my brain for a couple of years now, where I don't
Yes.
want to pay money to have my money be used in the way it's being used. Um, but I didn't know how to do it. So I'm really grateful that you guys have such a system, and that you have people that can actually help with this. One of the questions that came up when you were talking, and my brother had jokingly said, "Well, I've been tax resisting for 4 years because I haven't filed taxes." So, what is that a form of tax resistance, to just not file? Like, if you're getting paid cash as a waiter or a bartender or a housekeeper or something, and you just don't pay taxes, like, can you talk a little bit about how that plays out? And are you guys seeing like, consequences, or not really? Like, I know you can't, like, legally be, I don't want you to feel like people are like, "She told me on this podcast I don't have to pay my taxes." But overall, what are you guys seeing?
Yeah, and yeah, for that disclaimer, we aren't, I think as
Yeah.
Matrix, we share from the collective experience, and that's
Yeah.
really kind of what we've been doing for all these decades as well, and to support each other, and I think, yeah, bringing up a really important point or distinction that we come to this, from a principled stance, that we are taking this act of resistance within a history of civil disobedience. That we're taking on this. Many of the approaches are illegal. There are legal ways of living under the taxable income that many people do, and many people aspire to. Not entirely solely on resisting taxes for war, but to embrace a lifestyle that feels more, um, aligned with principles. So I think a big part of it coming into tax resistance that we often do, especially with like a smaller group, of like looking at motivations and values and looking, what are your goals in doing this?
Mm,
How, what's going on in your life that might enable you to resist in this way, and some of that changes over time. And so I think really asking those questions from the start. And it sounds like, I think similar to you, like many people have these questions bounce through their heads for years. It's just because it creates that tension. I think
mm,
we hear this thing about like moral injury, and we think about soldiers, but it really impacts a lot of us being
yeah.
alive in the society today, of being able to witness a genocide on our phone, oftentimes
Mhm.
alone, at any hour of the day. It
Yeah.
creates that tension and that moral injury. And so I think honoring, what brings us into that tension, and like what um yeah how to kind of reconcile that within ourselves is really important. Um and then with that, there's a variety of approaches. Some people don't want to have any engagement and don't want to be involved with the IRS, and so they don't file. So they don't, acknowledge the system. And some of that too is like a question like, how much engagement do you want to have with
Mm,
the IRS? Do you want to respond, or have that fear come up of getting letters from the IRS? And so I think to recognize that there's a variety of approaches to this,
mm,
and there's also consequences with that. And so we go through a lot of that in on the introduction to war tax resistance, like to file or not to file. We also have a whole pamphlet series in which one of them is titled "To File or Not to File," and
okay.
one on simple living. And so there's a lot of resources, but again, it can be a little bit daunting. And so I think just to honor like one's I think to start from what is the motivation in doing this, and to
Yeah.
have clarity about that really helps figure out the next step, and then the next step, and also to realize, you can change your steps any point in the process.
Mm. Yeah, the motivation topic, I think we have so many reasons right now.
Right.
Even if you weren't like, I mean, I know there's a lot of people when Gaza, that started to happen where they were like, I don't have a problem with Israel. They have the right to defend themselves. But now those same people are really upset about what's happening in Minneapolis with ICE.
Yes.
And then we've seen Republicans be very pro war, but now they're upset about the lack of accountability that's happening within the government for behaviors and, illegal activity, basically, and corruption and, harming children and women, and there's no accountability. So I feel like there's a collective shift happening right now
Mhm.
where a lot of people who probably wouldn't have been upset 5 years ago are really upset about the government, and they don't want their money being used anymore for things that they don't agree with. Um, so yeah, I think the why of why people want to resist is very strong and it's a big motivator, but you did mention consequences. So I know if these are automated computerized letters that are just being sent out because like bloop, you went into this box, you get this letter. Um if somebody like, what have you seen if people ignore the letters? Or do you instruct people, respond back to the letter and tell them, "Get bent," or whatever, right? Like, what how is that? Like, is there a little, like, tree that you can go down in this process?
Yeah, true. And I guess it varies. We do know that even people getting letters from the IRS results in about 50% of people then making a payment. So just a
Mm,
letter alone results in, 50% of people paying. And so that again speaks to the fear that the IRS has. We also know that there's almost a half of a trillion tax gap. So the government is supposed to collect about $2.5 trillion in taxes a year, and they collect about 2 trillion. So that's about
mm,
half of $1 trillion that they don't collect. And so I think to try to also see the wider picture in terms of, and those people, a lot of those people are not resisting on principle. It is
no.
because they don't want or they want to keep their money, and there's a long tradition of that, people with resources. And so
Mm,
I think that we've seen my colleague Lincoln Rice, who's the coordinator for the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, has been getting letters from the IRS since we've had very similar paths. He's been resisting since '98 and continues
mm,
to get these letters, but there hasn't been consequences
nice.
other than these letters. So it's
Yeah.
what we've experienced has been a very low possibility of action taken.
That's really encouraging to hear because I think we are at a tipping point collectively where if enough of us do this, they can't take us all to court. If there's millions of us resisting our taxes, they can't inundate the system with, courts. And they don't, like you said, they're already low resources. They don't have enough people working at the IRS to actually investigate these, especially when it's like, I think I owe $800. Like, really, you're going to take me to court over $800? Like, I could see that's the other thing, too, that I wanted to talk to you about. When I'm going to my tax preparer, I told him like 2 or 3 years ago, "Can you get it like because I own a business, so I can use deductions." That's one way that I use to not pay. Like, okay, and in reality, I'm not making a ton of money. Like, it would be very different if I was making millions and millions of dollars a year, and I'm buying a yacht, and I'm going to Paris for Fashion Week or something, but that's not the reality. So we use deductions to say, "Okay, um, this money you spent was for office equipment. This money you spent was for training." Like we categorize it down to where, in theory, I should owe nothing. But he, as a tax preparer, doesn't feel comfortable with that. He wants to pay a little bit because he says if you pay just a little bit, you fly under the radar. He goes, when you quote zero, I made zero and I owe you zero and there's nothing to see here. He goes, that pings in their system to look
Mm.
into you. And then I've also gone to a different guy that I did not end up using where I was trying to take deductions and he was like, you can't deduct that. You use that cell phone sometimes for personal uses. And I was like, Donald Trump wrote off his haircuts. What are you talking about? I was so mad at him. And so I didn't end up using him. But I think what people run into is they'll go to H&R Block or they'll go to Tax Slayer or they'll go to these things, and it'll be like bippity boppity boo, this is how much you owe. So can you give us some tips on when we are working with our tax preparers, how we can push them a little bit to kind of go along with us?
Yes, we do get a lot of questions about tax preparers, and if there's some that are sympathetic to war tax resistance, and like it just runs the spectrum. And so, I think often tax preparers, one of their main jobs or efforts is to reduce the amount of taxes you owe. And so, I think encouraging if you can find somebody who could help in that process, like that's their primary role. My the best of my understanding, to do it in a way that again is like transparent and and as legitimate as possible. And so i I think some people are more sympathetic towards tax resistance or withholding the government or money from the government. One of the tactics that we've also encouraged is for people to file on paper. And so, I think a lot of people then go with H&R Block or different things where it is electronic. And again, that kind of starts the process for those letters, those computer generated letters starting to
Mm.
come. And so again, it's another way to kind of slow down the process as well as require more resources from the IRS in the processing of that paper filing. So with the electronic filing, you can do that online and oftentimes like get it printed out or have a coupon. And then
Oh.
from there, you can decide how much you would send or not send, potentially writing a letter to the IRS if you want to express your opposition to paying for these things that are causing harm. At Newtrick, we also have a flyer that you can download that's called the Peace Tax Return that you can
Mm.
send in to the IRS or to elected officials as a way of conversation about your opposition towards funding these things that are causing harm.
Yeah, I think it was tax resistance for Palestine or some internet thing that I had followed, and they had a form or like kind of a sample letter. Do you all find that when you send those in, that it actually gets the IRS to leave you alone, or do they continue to still mail you things that are like, "Hey, we don't care. You still owe us your $800." Like, what is it just a stall tactic, or is it actually them going, "All right, this lady's really not going to pay us." Like, how does that end up working out?
And I think a lot of that depends on like which IRS agent, the letter might
Okay.
fall on. So, a lot of times people have high hopes that, because it takes a lot to make this stand. There's so many,
Yeah.
choices, as you were saying, like this way, that way, in which people make this and you think it's a great thing and I'm going to send this. And then when it falls flat, it's kind of disappointing for some in
Yeah.
terms of no response. But I think, yeah, people longing for that interaction with the IRS or as well as representatives and different people, but as a way of talking about, because a lot of times people are not aware of people resisting taxes on principle for, to not fund militarism. So I think it opens up conversations with people and to know that about half of it, our federal income taxes goes towards militarism.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's something too, like, I had gotten into, like, in the comments, in the weeds with somebody over this, and I was like, "I would be more than happy to pay my full share of taxes and actually pay more taxes if I had a say in where that money went."
Right.
Happily give you 50% of my income if I knew that money was going to teachers and EMTs and roads and, these things that I value and I care about as a member of this community and of this society. Like we see when I went to Europe with my husband, the infrastructure, like
Mm.
the streets are clean, there's free transportation, there's trains and buses and all kinds of things, free college, free healthcare, like free early childhood care, Head Start, daycare. All of these things I think we as a collective would be very happy to give our money towards because we know it would benefit the whole versus right now it's being extrapolated and used for violence. Um the other thing I've seen a lot of people get really upset about is the fact that we are basically the sugar daddy to Israel right now,
Mm.
and the Israelis get free healthcare and the Israelis get free higher education, and we do not. And like how
Mm.
make it make sense, people, right? And so I think there's a lot of passion around this topic right now. I think a lot of people are really motivated to get behind this. So you guys have the flyers on your website, you have these classes. Um, I know that the other thing too is like, if worst case scenario, like let's play it out. I don't pay my $800 and they were to put like a lien against my property. Um, is there like, do you just like eventually when you go to sell the property, you pay the lien off? Like I know when they do like an abstract of the mortgage company or whoever the title will go in and be like, hey, this property has like back taxes or they owe the HOA money. So is that one way to do it? It's just kind of delaying and you deal with it later on when you end up selling the property?
Yeah, and I'm kind of at a loss in terms of like having knowledge about how others in the network have handled that, and I think it speaks though to, kind of the whole process in terms of we get to make decisions along the way. I think for myself, I've gotten like caught up of like, well, what if this happens and that, and
Mhm.
to be able to trust ourselves in the moment of making those decisions or that it will become clear. So like in the process of trying to get like as much information as we can to make
Mm.
clear decisions, into yeah, what might happen and how life circumstances change. But I think the lien on the property is probably a place where people have seen the IRS take action in recent years so that if you do sell your property, that lien is there to address. I mean, that's assuming and kind of not knowing, well, what's going to happen with the IRS in the years to
Right.
come in that process if they're still going to be pursuing that.
Right.
And it's hard to say. And
Yeah, I could see, like, for example, if you just purchased your house and you have a 35-year mortgage on it or whatever, and you're not planning on leaving anytime soon, that's a lot less of a gamble versus somebody who, say, owns investment properties and they have lots of properties and sometimes they sell them and sometimes they buy new ones. There might be a little bit of a higher risk, right? That somebody would have
right.
to analyze, is this a path I want to go? Um, have you seen when people are like, one of the other tactics I saw was to write the letter and put it in there and then just like, let's say I owe the 800, I choose to pay them 300 and send the 300 in with the letter being like, this is all I'm going to get from you. Like, if is that a tactic that you guys have seen be successful where you're kind of giving them a little bit but you're not giving them everything because it is still hitting their pocketbook that way?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the tactic of how people decide what to resist. Often we think about for the tax year or April 15th of making a decision by then. So some people resist 50% because that's about how much is going towards the Pentagon and
Mm,
militarism. Some people withhold a symbolic amount like 1040 for the 1040 form. Some people, and so there's a spectrum. And so really haven't seen any correlation in terms of the IRS coming after people in relation to what it is they withhold.
okay.
I mean, what came to mind was there's somebody in our network, Larry Bassett, who got $1 million inheritance. And
Mm,
so he was supposedly owed about $250,000 on that. And and he withheld that amount, pretty
mm,
significant and very public, but he redirected that money, which a lot of people in our network do, and I realize hadn't really talked about it. So it's not a matter of not paying taxes. It is, that in trying to live with one's values and not paying for it,
mm,
but also we're redirecting that money into our communities so that we
mm,
are investing in what it is we want to see, be funded in our communities. And so there's a lot of alternative funds that people pay into that do redirections. There's one in the Bay Area that is not limited to the Bay Area that redirected $85,000 to local community groups last year.
nice.
And so that money makes, a significant impact to those groups
Mhm,
that it's been awarded to. And similar to Larry Bassett withholding, over $250,000 from the government, redirecting it, and there hasn't
cool.
been consequences to him, so it's kind of like,
That's nice.
yeah, like rhyme or
Yeah.
reason. It's hard to tell.
I feel like that's why, I mean, we love to criticize the billionaires because a lot of what they do with like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or the Smile thing that Amazon has is just a way, that's basically their form of tax resistance. They
Yeah.
have enough lawyers and enough accountants that they're like, okay, if we take this money and give it to a charitable trust or a foundation or, a nonprofit that we own and we operate, they're basically tax resisting and withholding that money from the government in a way that they still have control over. And it is a deduction that you can take on your taxes, charitable donations. So that's a really good tip you've just shared with us. Is I could say, well, technically I should owe you this $1,000, but I gave it away to Planned Parenthood or whatever it is that is your flavor of, supporting um, for donations and stuff. That's a really good way to tax resist if you know that you're going to be charged that. I remember a guy that owns a small business here, and he was talking to his accountant, and it was the end of the year, and he's like, you've made this much money this year. They're going to tax you on it, or you can go spend it. And so he went and bought a new vehicle for his company, and it ate up all the money he made, and then he didn't get taxed on it. So I'm sure your website is full of nice tips and tricks that you guys can utilize to try to avoid having to pay in. I think I feel like there was another thing we were going to talk about, and now I'm blanking out on it. But was there anything that we haven't discussed that you're like, this is really something people need to hear?
Well, yeah, going back to there were a couple of things you brought up and felt
Yeah.
like it didn't really speak to. I think one of the questions was about success of the movement, and it's
Mm,
hard to say or to quite qualify of success. I think people who are able to sleep better at night because they've taken action in which they know that they're not funding genocide in Gaza or the ICE and granted it's not for us to kind of have that individually feeling better and sleeping
right.
well at night. I think we here becoming more familiar with the whole notion of harm reduction, and so
Mm,
seeing this as kind of a tactic of harm reduction. So we're trying to not be paying and mitigating some of that harm that is being done the world over.
yeah.
And so I think we've heard a lot. It's hard to gauge like how many people are doing this act of resistance. I think there's a lot of people that we hear from once they get letters from the IRS. So I think we've seen just people coming accessing information on our website. In the past, it was like 5,000 people every January, and then last year I think what was the number? Like 13,000. This is like
Oh,
unique
nice.
visitors to our website. This year alone, we've seen 93 unique visitors in
Oh,
January. So people are, finding this information. They're also like hungering for ways to like live their life in more authentic ways, and
mhm,
hungering for community and just making the world a better place, trying to like invest in what it is they believe in. And I think we're kind of at that perfect storm. We've talked about this momentum. How do we get this momentum towards this
mhm,
movement going? And we've been seeing it with people signing up for the 101 introduction to war tax resistance. But it's also like glaring, as you mentioned, people making those connections with our tax dollars, going to
mhm.
rallies or for Gaza and people having signs like not another nickel, not another dime. Like people
Yeah.
are making that connection because it's so, with Israel being the number one recipient of our tax monies. And like you
Mhm.
said, they're afforded health insurance and different things and we don't have it. And so I think, not only are we seeing the harm that is happening with our tax money, we are seeing increasingly how those needs within our community are not being met. Medical debt is
Yeah.
just skyrocketing, putting people, into bankruptcy. All of these different
Mhm.
things are having a cascading effect. And so I think people realizing like you know, trying to see bigger picture of how do we resist? How do we strike? What
Mhm.
is within our power, our leverage to take action? And we know we have to do it collectively. We have to
Yes.
do it collectively. And so that's also where we get courage and inspiration from each other. And,
Mhm.
like this is one of many actions of people taking. But I think,
Mm.
you know, um, unfortunately, that's what the government, that's their language, money,
Yes.
hearing, and so I think trying to maximize that approach and share word and do this together with others.
Yeah. I think that's so important because somebody was talking today. I was listening to them and they said, we can't, I mean, yes, being out in the streets and protesting is valid and is needed and is necessary, but we have the largest military in the world. We literally can't fight them toe to toe, but we can hit their pocketbooks and we can take away the money. And it reminds me of when Biden was in office and the military budget came up and he gave them more than they were even asking for. He
Mhm.
increased it
Mhm.
without them asking. And I was like pulling my hair out, going, why the hell we elected a Democratic person that was supposed to
Right,
be
right.
to keep us, you know what I mean, going towards these more progressive ideals. And it was absolutely so frustrating. And I think you're right. We need to hit them in the pocketbook. If we reduce their resources, they cannot use our money to shoot us in the streets. They cannot use our money to abduct our citizens and put them in, internment camps or whatever's happening. Yeah, I think it's going to be very powerful collectively. And I was
Mhm.
talking to someone else and I was like, I think we had to get to a place where it was this bad and it was
Mm.
this glaring and it was this in our face to make us mad enough to where we would do things, because we've always seen the hippies and the countercultural people and they're kind of the fringes of society being like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to conform, I don't want to participate in a system that causes harm. But they've never been the majority, and I think now we're reaching a
Mhm.
tipping point where the majority of people are upset and the majority of people are unhappy and frustrated on both sides of the aisle. And I think it's a perfect time for us to collectively, use our power by withholding the funds, like you said, and using them in a way that we are proud of and that we are, morally and ethically in alignment with. um
Yeah, yeah. And maybe just to go back to what you were saying too, Candace, I think like also we're seeing increasingly like fear is also their currency. They're really
mm,
like the government, the ones who are
yeah,
making these choices that are not in accord with, life enhancing and just disregard for life.
yeah,
And so I think, yeah, to recognize that currency of fear and how prevalent it is with taxes, with the IRS, and maybe
mhm,
even just to step out of it for a little bit to imagine like what would our life look like if we weren't under so much fear,
mm,
and trying to like live into that and yeah, just so that we can really invest in that world, and I think
yeah,
a lot of it is recapturing the imagination and living into that. So, yeah, you mentioned webinars. We have been doing these introductions to war tax resistance. We'll be having one on February 24th,
nice,
that we have information on our website. We'll also be having an introduction to W4 resistance on March 5th, coming up, and that again is on our website. And we'll be continuing to do these in
okay.
the lead up to tax day. This year, we're putting a big push around Pi Day, which is going to be
Oh, 314.
Saturday, yeah, March 14th. And, as a way for people to come together and talk about tax resistance. So it's kind of taking off in different communities. Different communities have really emerged in the last few years too,
Mm,
strengthening people doing this work together and
yeah,
to share time or just to support each other. And so a lot of those communities have taken on doing introductions to war tax resistance.
nice.
So much of this is on our Instagram. We'll share information of those events happening. And yeah, we have a wealth of resources. I mentioned a few of them. I might, since we're on video, share a little bit. We have this recent an updated war tax resistance book
Oh,
that
wow.
really is quite informative. So it's been recently updated and it really goes through all of those questions. And again, kind of different learning styles, not for everyone, but you can
Nice.
find that on our website. There's also an ebook with it that like
Oh, nice.
really any question you have about war tax resistance is in this book. And also, again, it's, a phone call away from people on the counselors network. We really, yeah, there's just a lot of information. We have the peace tax return that I mentioned. Also have a flyer that's 5 easy steps that kind of go through some of
Mm,
those questions about to file or not to file, a whole pamphlet series. Yeah, I feel like I'm
yeah.
doing the website of sharing all this information.
No, it's
Don't want
it's really
to
helpful.
overwhelm, but yeah, that as well as, there's TikTok videos. We have a YouTube channel, and again, all of
Oh,
that
good.
on our website, a newsletter and stuff. And so I think to emphasize that, for people too who are newer to this, that there's, this collective institutional knowledge of people sharing what they've experienced, but also like
Mhm.
very eager to help and people
Yeah.
in this process. So I think to emphasize that people aren't alone in this.
That's really helpful, and that kind of, I think, goes back to the fear thing. What we're seeing right now is, like, our government embodying the entity of being fear-driven, and it's using, these tactics what we see in Minneapolis and what we are seeing, um, with the Epstein files and all these things. It's a very fear-based operation that they're running, right? They make us afraid that these terrible things are going to happen. And if we can come together, like you said, and talk to other people who have been resisting for years and learn from them, and they can kind of hold that space for us to work through these fears and kind of step past them, I think, you know, it's going to be better for everybody, like you said, because if we're in that energy of fear, we're not going to be able to create a new reality. And I think that's really important. We're at this this era of we need to create a new reality. It's clearly the system we're in is not working. It's not. It's a system of corruption. It's a system of destruction, not only for us as humans, but for the earth. And so, how can we step into a new energy, collectively support each other, step out of fear, and use our autonomy that we have to take a stance, you know. So, well, thank you so much, Chrissy, for sharing everything. I'm going to try to link everything you talked about in the show notes, and ours will be on YouTube, so it can be shared on your YouTube as well. And I really appreciate you taking the time, because this is something I'm very passionate about, but I feel like there's so much to know about it that it's kind of like, oh God, I get a little overwhelmed. I'm like, I really want to do this, but I don't know where to start. And I think you guys have so much free support and free resources, and like decades and decades of experience, which is amazing. And I appreciate, the hard work and the groundwork you guys have laid for us to come alongside you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Candice. I really, appreciate the opportunity to share with you and the audience about, vortex resistance and just, the drive that, I feel like you symbolize, represent the drive of so many people who
Yeah.
taking on this work and the curiosity and how do we invest in that world. And so really grateful
Hmm.
for kind of scratching the surface and in terms of sharing about vortex resistance and encourage people to, get more information. And again, like reach out, there's
Yeah.
hands out there to, walk through together and just, to kind of like lower that, like, oh, it's a lot, but like we get to take these steps together and we don't know what we're walking into, but I know it's going to be better than, what we're seeing in terms of
Yeah.
how we put our life energy. So grateful for
Yeah.
this opportunity.
Well, thank you so much, Chrissy. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching this week. And we will see you again next time. Okay.